All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. And Martyn, again, another weekend full of football. How'd you go watching it all?
Almost. I've still not stopped, actually, Jake. Yeah. It's Tuesday morning at the moment for those, viewers who don't know when we record this show. And I'm halfway through the London Broncos versus Wigan game, and I've still got to watch the game between Catalans and Hull. So, and because, of course, at the weekend I'm so busy putting the paper together that I don't have time to watch all these matches that are now on TV. So it's quite a challenge, really. But I love doing it. I love sitting through them and watching them, and it's fantastic. I mean, as I say, I've just been this morning before this podcast watching the first half of the London Wigan game, and it's fantastic to see those young Wigan players. Young Jack Farrimond and Tom Forber and so on doing so well, and I'm sure they'll keep doing well in the second half. But it's great to see so many games available, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of raps on that young Jack Farrimond, isn't there? He's the next big thing coming through.
He's only a small kid, but he's very sharp on his feet, and I mean, it's interesting to watch the next generation of players coming through, isn't it? And it's always quite fascinating to see these guys making their debuts and then thinking, well, in another few years' time, these kids might be household names. My prediction is that Jack Farrimond will be, and might even, I don't know what his, who's advising him or what he wants to do with his career, but don't be too surprised to see him one day, playing in the NRL and doing really well in another 5 or 10 years' time.
No, absolutely. And it's one of those things that Rodri Jones mentioned is that they're looking to these younger players coming through and thinking of ways that they can make those young players household names going forward. So I'm really interested to see how they approach developing him as a character on the field and off the field as well.
Absolutely, yes. Well, it's what the game needs to do, doesn't it? Because We've got some wonderful athletes for many of our clubs, actually, and yet none of them are really household names anymore. And, IMG, their job, as far as I'm concerned, is to help make these kids or turn these kids into household names so that whether you're a rugby league fan, a football fan, or a rugby union fan, or a fan of any other sport, when people mention these guys' names, you will know who they are.
No, absolutely. All right, mate. Well, how about we get into some of the results over the weekend, starting on the Thursday night, and how good was it to have Thursday night football back on our TV screens? It was great,
wasn't it? Yeah.
We had Warrington 22 defeated Hull KR 20 out in Hull that match.
With Matt Duffy starring and scoring the last try. We made that the try of the week, by the way, in League Express because it was such a crucial one, and it was one of those tries that came straight from a scrum as well. Smart play, straight from a scrum, and Duffy was in the left corner, and won the game for Warrington, and that would have been a shock for Hull KR, but it was touch and go throughout the game, wasn't it? I thought a really enjoyable game to watch, and Warrington just grabbed it. Sam Burgess' third win in 4 games. Not bad going.
Getting a bit of a roll on, some momentum behind them. Yeah, I will say that's little play off the scrum there they scored. That's a perfect example of why we need to keep the scrums in our game and not get rid of them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
You saw they decided to trap the ball there, and that gave Matt Duffy the time to sort of sprint around the other side and just created that overlap. It was beautiful.
Let's stop apologising for scrums and comparing them with rugby union scrums because, we don't allow pushing in our scrums, and that's for an obvious reason for the safety of the players. And it means we don't need those big, enormous guys who populate the front row of the scrum in rugby union. Our scrum is better than theirs because it gives so much scope for smart play, and that's the thing I think we ought to emphasise.
No, definitely. And good to see Matt Duffy playing well. I'm sure Sam Burgess is working on getting all the confidence into him.
Well, he seems. Matt Duffy seems really happy with where he is at the moment. I think Matt is a sort of fairly emotional player, really. He's probably up or down, and at the moment he's definitely up, and so are Warrington, playing well, and I think they, look to me as though they're going to have a good season this year. Their next game is against London, And you would imagine they would probably win that game, wouldn't you, really, with no disrespect to London. But no, it's a great start for Sam and great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ben Curry playing through the middle again. I thought he played very well. He might lock down that lock position perhaps.
Yes,
we
absolutely.
Should see.
Yeah.
Moving on, we also had Huddersfield 50 defeated Cass 8. This is a bit of a blowout.
Yeah, that was a bad result for Castleford, wasn't it? Losing by that margin at home was desperate for their supporters, and I felt sorry for them. And the problem is that Castleford have recruited quite a lot of players during the close season who are not established Super League stars or not established NRL stars. And I thought that was the first game in which it really showed, actually. They made a lot of errors. They didn't seem well organised, and they allowed Huddersfield to just dominate the game. The Huddersfield pack was much stronger. They were more creative in the way they threw the ball around, and they just walked through Castleford, I'm afraid. And Castleford will have to show a marked improvement, won't they, soon? Or the fans are going to get really cheesed off. They're 0 from 4, which is not great. And the only consolation for them is that there's no relegation this year. But they'll be relying on doing all the other things to get grading points from IMG. But my goodness, you need to be playing well on the field to keep your fans on side.
And it's disappointing because the first 2 matches they showed a little bit of promise, a little bit of fight.
I think they've got some promise, actually. And at the end of the day, this might be a one-off game, mightn't it? And there's a history of teams being heavily beaten during the season and then doing really well by the end of it. And the game that always springs to my mind, I mean, Castleford, if you go back to 2017 in March that year, they beat Leeds Rhinos 66-10 at their home ground, and it was probably the best performance I've ever seen a Super League side give. But in the grand final, Leeds beat them. Leeds recovered from losing 66-10 to beat Castleford in the grand final. So you can recover from a very bad result. The key thing for them is not to panic, not to get too depressed about that result. Get the fans back on side in some way. Obviously, this weekend they go to Catalans, I think, don't they? So that won't be easy. But Castleford have done it in the past, and I'm sure they'll win again in the not too distant future.
They just need to put that weekend's result behind them.
They do. Sometimes you've just got to draw a line under it.
Yeah, definitely. Then we had Leeds Rhinos 22 defeated Leigh 16. This was a bit of a tale of two halves, this matchup.
Yeah, if you were stood at the standing end of the league ground, you'd want your money back, wouldn't you? Because all the tries were scored at the other end.
Yep.
Amazing, really. An amazing game. 16-0 Leigh were leading at half-time. Leeds came back to score 22 points in the second half. I thought Leigh were very unlucky in the first half in having a Tom Amone try disallowed by the video referee. I thought it was a try personally, and that would have put them 22-0 ahead. That might have then been too much for Leeds to come back from. But, they lost Lachlan Lamb with a leg injury that hopefully won't keep him out for too long. But, it's not going that great for Leigh at the moment this year, is it? And they've played one fewer game than everybody else, but they're 3-0. And, things don't get much easier for them because this weekend they are, let me just have a look, they're at Hull. So that's a winnable game for them, but but Hull need to win it as well.
Adrian Lamb will be desperate to chalk up a win. But their hurt locker, it just continues to grow. Obviously, we've seen the losses of Edwin Apape, John Asiata, and now Lachlan Lamb. I heard Adrian Lamb saying that laceration will probably take 10 to 15 stitches. I think it was a leg cut, so it looks like he could miss 1 or 2 weeks.
I would imagine so. Yeah. Now the funny thing is, last year, when Leigh had such a great season, they had very few injuries, particularly to their key players. This year, it's gone the other way, and that's how it goes, isn't it? In rugby league, sometimes you have all the luck with injuries, and sometimes you have no luck whatsoever. And it looks as though it's gone from the former to the latter for Leigh this year.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see how Matt Moylan goes now in this weekend's matchup if he doesn't have Lachlan Lamb next to him.
Well, I think he's gone reasonably well in the last 2 games, Matt Moylan. But he's going to have to take charge now, particularly at Hull, who are struggling as well so much, aren't they? So, it's going to be an interesting game, I think.
Absolutely. Then we also had Salford 24 defeat Saints 20. They broke a 44-year drought.
You were there, weren't you?
Yes, I was there. It was probably one of the best matches I've seen live since being over here.
Well, I keep saying that Salford are the best team to watch in Super League, and I still think that, and certainly the game at Saints did nothing to change my mind. I thought Salford were terrific, led by Mark Sneed, of course, who I think is a terrific leader on the field. His kicking game in every respect is absolutely first class, whether it's kicking goals or kicking downfield or kicking short kicks to the line to win set restarts and so on. Salford played adventurously right from the start. They decided to throw the ball around, move the Saints pack around, and of course Saints obliged them early in the second half when Mark Percival got sent off for that shoulder charge. And I thought probably it looked harsh when you saw it in real time, but when you saw it slowed up, it did look like the right decision, probably. Yeah. So tough luck for Mark, really. I'm sure he didn't have any malicious intent, but it was just one of those incidents where, he got Jack Ormondroyd and, he had to go. And that obviously probably gave Salford an inkling that they could come back and win the game. But, they did so well, didn't they? They were 20 points to 8 down, I think, at one stage in the second half, and they came back with late scores to win it.
Yeah, it's funny because when you've got the TV screen at the stadium, it's really hard to see those finer details. And it wasn't until a lady in the crowd sitting in front of me, she must have been sent a photo from a friend that showed the shoulder contact with the head. Yes. So I sort of had a peek over her shoulder and I saw the contact and I thought, okay, yeah, that's probably fair enough.
Yeah. Well, I hope she's watching. Card. Who knows?
Yeah, that's right. So thank you to that lady. But yeah, defending the rest of the match with 12 men, I think it was, they had to defend with 12 men for 35 minutes or so. You could just see the fatigue creeping in towards the end of the match.
I'll tell you something as well. That try by Chris Atkin, where he got the ball probably about 10 or 12 metres out and beat some tiring defenders. Reminded me very much of Nathan Cleary's try in the NRL Grand Final last year.
Oh, giving me PTSD, mate.
Did that bring back memories for you?
Bad memories. Yeah, it was a really good match, and geez, I tell you what, Tim Laffey, that little flick past offload,
fabulous player.
Cross.
To think that he retired 2 or 3 years ago, didn't he?
Yeah.
And Salford persuaded him to come out and retire. I think he was working on a building site or something at the time, and his career's just been extended, and he's such a good player. He is, and that's the thing about Salford. They managed to find players who, for some reason, are perhaps not wanted anywhere else or not wanted by another specific club. Another obvious example is Nenny MacDonald, who fell out with Leeds at the end of last season. And he's come to Salford now and looks great to me. They're just smart at picking out players who are going to fit into their system.
I wonder who it is. They must have a good scout in amongst Salford.
Well,
there
sure
who's
they
identifying
do.
this
Well, they
talent.
also have a good coach, I think, in Paul Rowley.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing I will say in terms of Mark Sneed's play, he did that without Cade Cust, who obviously went off with a HIA.
Yes.
Pretty, around the middle of the match there. So, to orchestrate that performance.
But Chris Atkin's a really good substitute, I think. I really like young Chris Atkin. He's always on the bench, but he can always inject something when he comes onto the field, and I thought he did do in that game really, really well.
Really highlights the benefit of having a utility like that on your bench,
no doubt about it.
Especially with the amount of cards we're seeing this year.
Absolutely.
In other matchups, we had Wigan 60 defeated London 22.
Yes, as I say, I've watched the first half of that game, and I mean, London seem really willing and working hard and doing some quite good things. You know, it's great to see Leigh Kershaw playing so well for them on the wing, because I really rated Leigh when he was at Wakefield. But the disaster for London, the first 3 Wigan tries all came directly from London Broncos' mistakes. Wigan are probably the best team in the competition at punishing other teams that make mistakes, and I think Wigan focus quite a bit on that in their training methods, and certainly it worked, you know, in Saturday's game, and they were 16-0 up, you know, when London had looked competitive but just made these errors, particularly in their own half of the field. You know, not playing the ball properly. You know, the third try came when Fenton Rodgers had the ball coming out of his own 10-metre area, playing the ball, and he pushed over a Wigan defender and got penalised for it. I mean, that's a crazy mistake to make, isn't it? And Wigan, as I say, they were in for the third try almost immediately after that incident, and you can't win if you keep making those sorts of mistakes. The only thing I would say, though, is that the sort of mistakes that London did make, they can probably quite easily rectify. So if they can, then, you know, you hope that they would do a lot better. And, you know, apparently in the second half they got to within 6 points of Wigan, but then Wigan blew them out late on. Wigan's strength up the middle is so formidable. But it was just great to see so many younger Wigan players. Harvey Hill, who scored a try, Junior, and Semba was a terrific prospect in my view. We've already mentioned Tom Forber and Jack Farrimond. You know, Wigan are so good at bringing players through, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, do you think it was, well, obviously the right decision now in hindsight to rest some of his players, Pete, but do you think we'll see other clubs do this against London?
Well, you never know. But there's an interesting point here, because you know the 44 recommendations that the Brain Health Committee has recommended to the RFL, and the RFL has adopted them.
Yeah.
One of the recommendations that's had probably less attention than it deserves is the fact that from next year, players are only going to be allowed to play a certain number of games and a certain number of minutes. So from next year, you're going to have to, if you're a club coach, you're going to have to rest your players from certain games.
Yeah.
You know, so what Matt Pete did at London on Saturday is what all the coaches will have to learn how. They'll have to select games from next year to play players who are not normal members of their, you know, starting 17 or, you know, game day 17. I mean, it's interesting as well. Wigan played Ryan Hampshire at standoff half, and Ryan is a player I've admired for a long time. I think a really good player, but he's just not been able to get into the side because obviously Bevan French plays at standoff, but Matty Pete rested Bevan for this game, and Ryan Hampshire, I thought, had a very influential game, and great to see. Ryan Hampshire would probably get a starting run in the vast majority of other Super League teams, I think.
Who knows? We might have London come calling.
Well, if I were London, I'd inquire about him. There's no doubt about that. Yeah,
even just a loan deal or something.
Yeah,
like that
I'd certainly make that inquiry if I were them.
Yeah, and we also had Catalans 26 defeated Hull FC 12. A close match, and it looked like Hull FC, it seemed like they were coming back, but in the end, Catalans just sort of ran away with it. Yeah,
as you would have expected when you look at the two teams. You know, it was a game played in dreadful weather, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, which you didn't, I don't suppose you really expect in the south of France, but you know, Hull were unlucky in a sense, but they've still got a really weakened side with suspensions and you know, they're struggling with. They desperately need Jake Truman back in their side to give them some sense of direction, in my view, around the pitch.
Any idea on when his return will be, or how long he has left?
Well, not until. Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm obviously not privy to what's happening within the whole club, but I would assume the end of April for him. Hopefully before then, though. And he's such a fine young player, and I think he'd have a really good combination with Famanu Brown at halfback. But they need him urgently, I think.
So that sort of wraps the Super League matchups. We also had some Challenge Cup round 5 fixtures. Batley 18 defeated Widnes 14.
Great win for Batley at Widnes. My goodness, that's I fancied Widnes to win that game, and Batley did it, and Batley are a really competitive side, particularly in knockout games. They always seem to be able to pull something out of the bag in knockout games. Last year they got to the 1895 Cup final and very nearly beat Halifax in that game at Wembley. Obviously they're not going to get to Wembley in the Challenge Cup final, but still a fine effort from them. We
also had Sheffield 14 defeated Swinton 12. Another very close game.
Very close, yeah. In Haywood Road in Sale, yeah. Again, Sheffield. Interestingly, Sheffield have been drawn against Wigan in the next round of the Challenge Cup, and that takes us back to 1998 when they beat Wigan at Wembley in a very memorable Challenge Cup final.
Yeah, that's. I'm wondering whether they'd prefer to play another someone else, a different opposition.
But maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what can you do? Featherstone 14 defeated Wakefield 10. A bit of a surprise, but geez, the scenes from this game were amazing.
Glorious mud. Absolutely amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are lots of people who say we ought to revert to playing in winter, and I can see the arguments that they've got. But do we really want to see players covered in mud, and do we really want to be out shivering in the middle of winter watching games? I'm not quite sure. I don't think I do, but maybe that maybe we'll we'll see. I mean, there was all this talk, wasn't there, of the NRL taking over Super League and switching it back to winter, which I think would be absolute madness personally. But who knows? Who knows?
I just couldn't tell the two teams apart towards the end of that match.
Well,
I couldn't see the colours. It was just everyone was covered in mud.
No, and could you imagine anybody watching that game and thinking, "Oh gosh, I must watch more rugby league."
Yeah.
If they weren't already familiar with the game, I can't really imagine that somehow. But it was a great win by Featherstone, incidentally. I mean, let's not understate the magnitude of that win for Featherstone. A lot of people said Wakefield would go the season undefeated. Well, that's already, that's been shot to bits already. And Featherstone, amazingly enough, these two teams are only about 5 or 6 miles apart, if that. But it's the first time they've played each other since 1998, and that was in the championship grand final. At Huddersfield, when Wakefield beat Featherstone 24-22 and gained promotion to Super League. And since then, they've never played each other because they've not been in the same competition. And in the old days, when I was a kid, that was the big derby I used to really look forward to going to. Featherstone was a mining village in those days, and we always used to go from Wakefield, and you always seemed to be, walking through what was very clearly, a mining area, and it was, they always used to say with Featherstone, if they needed another player, they'd yell down the nearest pit, and there were always such fierce contests and played with such incredible passion, and I love that passion that Featherstone has, and I wasn't there on Sunday, but I'm sure that passion was on display again. Sometimes it boils over a bit too much, you've got to say. Sometimes the fans can go a bit over the top. But nonetheless, it's great to see people loving the team as much as the Featherstone fans do.
And perhaps the loss Wakefield needed just to try and, refocus and take that sort of pressure off them from going undefeated.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm not sure that they'll be pleased at having lost that game, but, I'm sure they won't be. But, but they've still got the semi-finals coming up of the 1895 Cup, which will see the final. I think that's on the weekend of May the 12th, and that will see the winners playing at Wembley in the final of that competition, and Wakefield play Bradford in that game. And oddly enough, this Friday night they kick off the new championship season also against Bradford, but this time at Wakefield.
Okay, so maybe a little preview of what's to come.
Absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, it's good to see. Oh, we also had Halifax 62 defeated York Acorns 6.
Well, that's
the only blowout of the weekend.
Yeah, that's the amateur team out of the competition. That's but great for them to get to the 5th round. My goodness, what an achievement on their part, and but not surprising that they were heavily defeated by Halifax.
No, definitely. Now, in terms of some of the news stories we've seen this week, some that's been featured in the paper this week, the Saints chairman Eamon McManus says that he would like to take the Saints to Vegas as part of the NRL fixtures. Do you think, in terms of the popularity of clubs, Saints would be a good pick if it wasn't the World Club Challenge?
Oh yes, I'm sure there would be. I mean, Saints would represent England extremely well wherever they went. I think you could take St Helens anywhere, and they'd do a great job, as we saw last year at when they went to Penrith. Has anybody actually come back to you in last week's podcast? You mentioned a really smart way of getting the World Club Challenge on. With giving the NRL Grand Final winner a bye the following week. Has anybody got onto you about that and said what a great idea?
No, well, I've been checking my mail every day just to see if there's a $100,000 check there.
From Graham Annesley or Peter Vlandis.
No money in the mail, unfortunately. Just a quick reminder to Graham, if you do want to pay up, I'll send you my details privately, mate.
Yeah.
But no response. I think we had a few comments. People saying it'd be great to see an England team feature because of the amount of England fans that would travel over.
They would do. There's no doubt about it.
And it seems to be Vlandis has kept coming out. Like I think he was on radio last week saying that's organically the next step they want to do.
I can't see it happening next year because I think they've already more or less promised that there will be 4 NRL teams going next year, haven't they? I mean, so I can't see that happening next week, which is a shame, really. Next year, rather, which is a shame. But there's also a lot of quite a big push for a women's game to be played there too, and I can see that an NRL women's game between 2 of the top NRLW sides, or even involving a women's side from this country, would be terrific. I think in Vegas. The only slight negative about that is that I'm not sure that they'd take the same number of fans that they would do for a men's game, and maybe that's very important. So it may take some time for the women for a women's game to be included, but eventually I'm sure it will be.
No, yeah, definitely, and it'd be great. I'm sure the Americans would love to see some of our women go at it in such a brutal sport. But speaking of Vegas, mate, we had some news over the last few days that Roosters prop Spencer Leniu's been handed an 8-week suspension for the racial sledge he had towards Broncos standoff Ezra Mam. He came out before the judiciary hearing and pled guilty to the charge, and he's going to be sitting on the sideline for the next 8 weeks. Yeah,
that's not too surprising, is it? I thought that would be about what they would hit him with, and I mean, he insisted beforehand that he wasn't aware that using the word monkey in relation to an Indigenous player was viewed as a racial insult, and I can probably believe that because when you use a word like that, it's sometimes quite possible for the meaning that you have to be quite different from what the person on the receiving end of that comment understands by it. And clearly, Ezra Mam clearly felt, that it was a racial insult, and Leniu insists it wasn't. And he's actually had some supporters, Leniu, from some other well-known players in the NRL. There's a story this morning, saying that the Manly player Hamoli Olakau'atu, saying that he never realised that term was a racial vilification expression as well. So, but who knows? But I think from now on, that the important thing is that from now on, everybody will realise it, won't they? And I think we'll see less of it. And I mean, Rugby League has a long tradition of players sledging each other on the pitch, particularly in Australia, actually, oddly enough. You know, Michael Ennis, who's now a commentator, was a great sledger, but not I don't think, using any racist terminology. But, you know, I think players now will be a lot more careful about what they say to their opponents on the pitch, and I think that's only a good thing. Personally,
that's right.
Yeah, respect is important, isn't it? And you know, we always say this: respect your opponents, respect your teammates, respect the referees, and respect everybody else involved with the game.
And like, I enjoy the mind games as much as the next person. Like, I like seeing players try to get under their opposition's skin. You know, as you mentioned there, Mike Innes, he's one of the greatest for it. I'm sure Warrior Hargraves, when he goes out, he tries to get under his opposite number's skin. But yeah, I think especially growing up in Australia, like you do need to educate yourself. You do need to understand, you know,
the history of the country. Actually,
that's right.
Yeah.
And you know, for him to say that he, you know, didn't know that was you know, considered racist, like it's your duty to know what is and what what isn't. And,
absolutely,
it's a little bit of ignorance on his behalf, but. Yeah, I think 8 weeks is a fair ban, and you know, I think that there should be some sort of education for him on the culture of Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia.
Yes, because I think he's Samoan, or is he Tongan? I'm not quite so sure.
Samoan, I believe.
Samoan,
yeah. So, and I think we might have touched on last week. It is disappointing seeing it come from someone with. You know, an Islander culture like him, because I'm sure there's probably been times in his life where he's experienced racism as well. So,
well, maybe, who knows? But, you know, it's interesting that the Indigenous culture in Australia is quite distinct from the Islander culture. And maybe that's one reason why, you know, he could claim he wasn't aware that was a racial insult. Who knows? But, you know, but we you know, it's unwise to, you know, lump people together, isn't it? The Indigenous players are a distinct group from the Samoan players, and they're distinct from the Tongans as well. They all have their own history, and it's important to respect all of them, I think.
No, definitely. And he offered to fly up to Brisbane and apologise to Ezra Mam in person, which Ezra Mam sort of denied, you know, that proposal from Spencer Leniu, which I can understand, given what we've heard about the fallout that happened in the hotel lobby after the match. It didn't seem like he was showing much remorse after the match either. So I can understand why Ezra doesn't want to hear from him, and maybe down the road they will.
Well, he said, Spencer Leniu said that he only realised that it was a racial insult, you know, the following morning, 6:30 a.m, when he got a text message from an Indigenous lady who pointed out to him, you know, precisely what it was. And he said he only realised at that point the seriousness of what he'd said. And, you know, when he says that, you've got to believe him, of course. I think, you know, there's no reason not to. But I think at the end of the day, I'd be very surprised if at some point in future, maybe next time Brisbane play the Roosters, that he will make a personal apology to Ezra Mam. And I'd be very surprised if that wasn't a genuine apology as well.
Yeah, well, time heals all wounds, so and it's a great lesson for the rest of the players in the NRL. You know, don't be doing any of this stuff in our game.
Absolutely,
it's not welcome. So,
couldn't agree more.
Yes, now we also had some more Saints news in the paper this week that looks like their women's team are going to be getting some match payments this year,
Absolutely,
which is a great
yes.
step in the right direction.
It is, yeah. No, it's great to see. I mean, you know, we've seen how professional now the NRLW is in Australia, and we're heading in that direction, hopefully. And not all women's teams are professional yet, but it's becoming more so. You know, York, Leeds, St Helens, Wigan, I think, perhaps have started paying players as well. I'm not quite so sure in their case, but yes, it's gradually becoming, you know, much more widespread, and it's great to see, isn't it? And, you know, women, it's interesting to see women playing rugby league because, you know, whereas when men play rugby league, it's often a physical battle for dominance. When women play rugby league, it's often a skill battle, really. And in some respects, it's more fun to watch women than men play because there's probably less of the attrition and more the open play, I think, and that's really great. I'd recommend to anybody to go and watch women playing rugby league.
It almost reminds you of the way that rugby league was played back in the 90s and 80s when there wasn't so much wrestle and slowing down the ruck. It's a faster game and probably more organic. But if you had to sort of put a timeline, how long do you think it'll be until we do see the sport become professional for the women?
Fully, a full Super League of female players all being paid. Probably 5 to 10 years, I would think. But who knows? Sometimes things happen very much more quickly than we anticipate.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed, because the quicker we can get there, the better, I think.
Absolutely.
Now, in some of the NRL action over the weekend, Morgan Smithies and Kai Pearce-Paul had their debuts for the NRL clubs. Morgan Smithies had an impressive performance. He came
out on top, yeah.
Yes, they defeated the Knights in that matchup. Was it 28-12? That was in Newcastle, a good crowd there. But Morgan Smithies, I think he topped the tackle count for the Raiders. He had 46 tackles, 14 runs and for 108 metres and had 37 post-contact metres. So
I think he's going to be a real great acquisition for Canberra, and I think they'll really bring him on really well. And, they've got a history now of signing English players, haven't they? And, I'm sure they'll be back for more, to be honest.
We need to put out the feelers and try and find out who is giving Ricky Stewart all the intel from this side of the world.
Well, it's not me, I'll tell
contact?
You. It's not you, I assume.
No. But he hasn't missed with any of his English players that he's brought over.
No.
There's a good relationship there between the Canberra Raiders and
players. To be blunt about it, if I were Ricky Stewart, I'd just be looking at Wigan players and Saints players, perhaps, and picking out those guys and seeing if they're interested in spending some time in Australia. And a lot of them might. Who knows? Even if it's just for a couple of years. George Williams went for a couple of years, didn't he? But then came back and actually had a bit of a fallout at Canberra. But it's a great club. The only bad thing about Canberra, in my view, well, apart from it's probably got the worst climate in Australia, it's the only place in Australia where I could go and feel cold, I think, to be honest. And also it's got one of the, it needs a better stadium, doesn't it? Yeah. The Canberra stadium is falling behind the rest, really. When you look at, Combank Stadium in Parramatta, you look at Alliance Stadium in Sydney, you look at all the Queensland stadiums, they're all a hell of a lot better than the stadium that Canberra play in. And I think at some point they're going to have to build a new one, to be honest. And I hope the government will, the Australian Capital Territory government will do that.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see, and especially it's our capital, so
absolutely, it ought to be better.
Yeah. Kai Pearce-Paul, he had 40 minutes off the bench for the Knights, had 9 runs for 89 metres, 42 post-contact metres, and he made 20 tackles. I thought he was pretty solid in his debut.
I think he will. I think he'll do well over there.
I think it's just about sort of.
He's got great offloading skills. Actually, one of the best offloaders in Super League last year, and I'm sure that will transfer very easily to the NRL.
Definitely. And the other matchups, Sharks defeated the Warriors 16-12, which was a bit of a
surprise because apparently the Warriors. Were incredibly impressive in the first half, but they didn't manage to translate dominance into points sufficiently. They were 12-0 up, but then Cronulla came back to score 16 unanswered points and win the game. And that was a terrific achievement by them.
Storm 8 defeated Panthers 0. What a tough battle that was.
Yeah, and
keep their streak alive.
The Panthers had a try controversially disallowed, didn't they, for obstruction, which looked a bit dodgy to me. But people are saying that for a game that only had one try, that was one of the best games to watch that you could hope to see, and it was ultra competitive, wasn't it? Yeah,
it didn't disappoint, and the Storm do that without Cameron Munster and Nelson Solomona. Good effort. But the Eels beat the Dogs 26-8.
Again, disappointing for Canterbury. They they're always going to do a lot better, aren't they, Canterbury, until they actually get on the field, and then they get beaten fairly comfortably again. You wonder what the problem is there, don't you?
I think that it's just going to take them a few years to build. They seem to have signed every utility player in the competition. There's so many players fighting for that halves and utility position on the bench. So
absolutely, yeah.
Give them a few more years. I'm sure they'll get back to where they were. Now, what else do we have? Dragons 28 defeated Titans 4. A bit of an upset win there. A really good effort for Shane Flanagan in his return to coaching.
Well, Shane Flanagan must be a good coach, mustn't he? Because I would have said that game was going to be pretty even, really. And of course, you've got Des Hasler coaching the Titans, and that was his first game in charge, but an easy win for the Dragons. And interestingly, they've got Zach Lomax playing on the wing. Very unhappy at playing on the wing, but he had an outstanding performance. I think he made something like, was it 229 metres or something? Yeah. Looked great, but he's still sort of looking for a potential move. And I noticed the club is not allowing him to talk to Parramatta because they've expressed a strong interest in him. So, that relationship between Flanagan and Lomax is going to be really interesting to see how it develops this year. And if you can keep Lomax on side, I think the Dragons could do a lot better this year than many people. A lot of people have tipped them for the wooden spoon, but maybe that's not what's lying in wait for them. Who knows?
Well, I was listening to the Levels podcast the other day, and that's hosted by Justin Horrow and Billy Mason, and they were talking about Lomax playing on the wing, and now that he's playing on the wing and that performance he had on the weekend, like, it's more of there's a better pathway there for him if he wants to go on and play representative football, because he's not competing with the likes of Tom Travojevic, Latrell Mitchell, Stephen Crichton for those centre positions. They said if he can lock down that wing spot and have a great season, there's no reason why he can't go on to
absolutely no
make representative teams. So really interesting to see how he goes there. I know me personally, I'd much rather play on the wing than in the centres. Less defensive work.
Although quite crucial defensive work, actually. Right. Defending on the wing is a lot tougher than it looks, because you don't have to make as many tackles, but the ones you do make are often really vital.
Yeah, try-saving ones.
Yeah.
And then the final matchup, Cowboys 43 defeated the Dolphins 18.
That was a bit of a shock as well, wasn't it? Not necessarily that the Cowboys won it, but the fact that they won it by such a convincing margin, 25 points. But I thought they looked outstanding.
They did.
They had a disappointing year last year, finishing 11th. But this year, they've certainly got off to a great start, and a big disappointment for Wayne Bennett and the Dolphins, especially played in front of a crowd of more than 32,000 at Suncorp Stadium. So, and this week the Dolphins play St George, so that's going to be a very interesting test for both sides. I think they're playing at their normal home ground, aren't they? Not at Suncorp, but in Redcliffe itself.
Yeah, which will be good. I'm sure Redcliffe will be packed, and there'll be a lot of noise being made from the fans. Now, looking forward to the next couple of weeks. So we also had the Challenge Cup Round 6 fixtures announced, but we've also had news that the BBC won't be televising any of those matchups on TV.
Not on TV, but they're only doing it online. Which is a bit surprising, isn't it?
Yeah. Another side note, so I'll just quickly run through the fixtures. So we've got Halifax taking on Catalans, Huddersfield taking on Hull FC, Hull KR taking on Salford, Leeds taking on St Helens, Leigh taking on Featherstone, Warrington taking on London, and Wigan taking on Sheffield. Now, the only issue I have here is the Leeds are playing the Saints this weekend. And then they'll have to
play them again
next weekend, both at Headingley.
They will, yes.
Yes, a little trial run this weekend before their Challenge Cup fixture.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see how they go. And this weekend's matchups, we've got Salford taking on Wigan. Who do you like in that one, Martyn? That's going to be
you've got to go for Wigan, despite Salford's great win at Saints. I'm not sure that I would ever tip against Wigan this season. I think Wigan looks such a strong side this year that I can see them winning. We'll get to Good Friday on March the 29th, and Wigan go to St Helens on that day, and that will be the first, time I think that they'll be with a chance of not winning. But Salford, I admire them enormously, but I just can't quite see them pulling it off against Wigan, no matter how well Mark Sneyd plays.
Yeah, it'll be.
I just don't think they've got the ammunition up front.
Yeah, no, true. It'll be interesting to see if that swift ball movement from left to right that they do coming out of their own end. I wonder if they can catch out that Wigan defensive line.
Well, who knows?
But,
who knows?
That's right. I agree. Though it is hard to tip against Wigan. Then we have, obviously, you just touched on it, Leeds taking on St Helens.
Well, that's a really interesting game. I think St Helens will be wanting to bounce back from that defeat against Salford, so I think I would tip them to win that game. But Leeds did extremely well to come back against Leigh, and I think Leeds are now in 5th place, St Helens are 2nd, and Leeds will be desperate to notch up another win, particularly against such eminent opponents.
Seemed like in that second half too, the spine started to really click.
Oh yes,
or gel together.
Absolutely,
so, Then we have the Giants taking on Hull KR.
An interesting game indeed, that one. Yeah, very interesting game. Huddersfield have won 2 out of 4. Hull KR have won 2 out of 4. They sit next to each other on the table, 7th and 8th place. I find that a really hard game to predict. I think I'd be tempted to tip Huddersfield by 2 points, but it could easily go the other way, couldn't it? And we'll see whether Hull KR can recover from that disappointment last weekend.
It's always hard to tip for or against a team that's just beaten a team by 50 points, especially if they're a middle of the pack side.
Yeah,
it's very hard to see if they can replicate that sort of performance.
Absolutely.
Then we have Hull FC taking on Leigh, which should be...
Well, again, a tough one to call, really, because, Hull have got 2 points, Leigh have got 0. Both sides are going to be absolutely desperate to win this game, and I think I would probably tip Leigh to win it, depending on who's available for Hull, of course. If players are sort of coming back into the Hull side, obviously Herman Esse came back last weekend, and they might have some more players coming back either from suspension or injury. So tough to call, but I think Leigh just might be that bit more desperate.
Yeah, we've got Catalans taking on Castleford.
Well, you can only see one result here, can't you? Catalans to win comfortably, especially if Castleford play like they did last Saturday.
And we've got the London Broncos taking on Warrington down in London, I believe.
Yes, I'd love to see London doing well, but I think Warrington are just going to be a little bit too good for them. And I think London will remain anchored on 0 points.
I think this will be a crucial game for Warrington to get that, keep that ball rolling and keep
the
that momentum
going.
If they win by a big margin in this one, it could be a very slippery slope for the rest of the competition if they get some momentum.
Oh yes, absolutely.
But before we wrap things up here today, mate, is there anything else you'd like to touch on before we sign off?
No, I don't think so. I think we're more or less covered everything. As we say, we've talked about all the games. We've talked about Saints going to Las Vegas sometime, hopefully in the near future. We'll see what happens. There's a Rugby League Council meeting this week, tomorrow in fact, and one of the things they're going to debate is the structure of the Championship and League One competitions, and I think they're also going to announce a new broadcast deal for the Championship competition, probably with Premier Sports, so which I hope is true. So we'll see what happens there and how that will work with the Championship due to start this weekend. So it's interesting actually. We've got a questionnaire, a readers' poll up on our totalrl.com website at the moment, asking our readers what would you like to see for the Championship and League One league structure, and the vote that's winning at the moment, and I'm not saying it's going to win by the end of the week. The vote that's winning at the moment is for all the teams to be brought together in one competition with a graded fixture list. So that's interesting, isn't it? That the readers are going for that rather than maintaining two separate, Championship and League One competitions.
That's very interesting. And, obviously we'll bring it all to our listeners next week in the episode. I'm sure we'll have a lot more to discuss.
Absolutely.
But we will remind our listeners and viewers, if you are watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. You'll be notified every time we upload the podcast and other content. And make sure you grab a copy of this week's edition of the League Express paper.
Yeah.
If you want to
just show you the front page before we go. There you are, available in your newsagents and hopefully everywhere that sells newspapers with a bit of luck.
And if you want your online copy, head along to totalrl.com/shop. Martyn, it's been a pleasure, and I guess we'll do it all again next week.
We will. Great stuff, Jake. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers, mate.